Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, this is going to be a different video than anything we've ever done on the channel before, because essentially all I'm doing here is doing a deep dive into Hot Fuzz, why this movie is so important to me, why I truly believe it's a horror film, and I want to talk about just how genius the writing is in general. A lot of the foreshadowing and a lot of the lines that come into play later on that you don't even think about. I think this is a brilliant movie, and I put it right up there neck and neck with Shaun of the Dead as one of my favorite horror comedies of all time. Now, why do I think this is a horror movie? We will get into that, because like I said, I firmly believe this is not only a slasher, I think this is a folk slasher that is on par with something like Midsommar and on par with something like The Wicker Man, and I know you're giggling already. Now, when I'm talking about a folk slasher, obviously those movies aren't very slasher-esque, but they have slasher qualities of them. This one a lot more than them. This is if you took those movies and you mixed them with Scream, like a whodunit, you would get Hot Fuzz. Could you make the argument that this is a police procedural comedy? Absolutely you could. But there's so many things that tie into each other when it comes to foreshadowing that it really makes you think a lot. And there's a lot of thriller in this. And a lot of the lines that come back later on, I think, are just brilliant. Like one of the first lines in the movie,
Sergeant, I kind of like it here.
when they want Nicholas to go out to Sanford,
Welcome to Sanford.
and he doesn't want to. You know, I kind of like it here. I like it in London. And they're like, well, dude, to be honest, you're just way too fucking good, you know? So then he ends up telling him,
With respect, sir, you can't just make people disappear.
and remember that. You can't just make people disappear, because that will come into play later on. Now, obviously with a movie like this, there's going to be a lot of comedy. You know, we know we got Simon Pegg, we know we got Nick Frost, you know you got Edgar Wright. Coming off of Shaun of the Dead, they had to come up with a worthy successor. I think they really did that, and funny moments like this really land.
No. Does Bob look like the kind of person I'd go out with? It's Dave.
Hello there.
You know, he's just trying to figure out, you know, I want you, you know. He can't switch off. He can't stop being a police officer. And I love that moment. Does he look like someone on a date? It's the same guy, essentially. And that was director Edgar Wright in a cameo, voiceover cameo. They also do pay homage to a lot of other horror movies.
I was hoping to check in.
Check in? But you've always been here.
And The Shining being only one. There's a lot of different homages in this. And you want to talk about foreshadowing. When he walks up, she's like, fascist. And he's like, what did you say? And she reads from her crossword puzzle. And he's like, oh, okay, hag. And she's like, excuse me. And he reads, it's number 11 down. You know, so she calls him a fascist and he calls her a hag. And at first you're like, oh, you know, funny throwaway line because they're doing a crossword puzzle. But again, I promise you that is going to come back into play later on. So Nicholas decides when he gets to town that he's going to go out and, you know, have a drink. He doesn't drink alcohol, but he's going to go out and he's going to honor the local pub. And he goes in, and every kid there is obviously not of age. So he wants to walk around and ask every kid, when were you born?
When's your birthday?
22nd of February.
What year?
Every year.
Get out.
Something else, I watched a lot of the director's commentary on this and a lot of behind the scenes. They really wanted to highlight how much paperwork police officers go through. They feel like when they were doing interviews with real police officers, one of the big things they said was, yeah, you see the explosions, you see the chases, you see those things, but you never see the paperwork they do. So this movie really makes a valiant effort to show a lot of the paperwork that comes along with being an officer. Like when he goes and he takes all these kids in that were out at the pub, you know, this is going to be a lot of paperwork, and he pulls out 2 pens and clicks them. You know, they really make a concerted effort to show you the amount of paperwork that goes into being a police officer as well. Another thing that's great, the next morning, he's not even part of the, you know, Sanford Police Department yet. The next morning he's going on a run, you know, and he's just, you know, trying to get his morning jog in. And as he's meeting the people, as he's running, that's the exact order that he sees them in the third act. And I think, again, that's the brilliance of the writing of this movie and the foreshadowing. There is an insane amount of foreshadowing and telling stories before they're even told. This is a movie you should watch 2 or 3 times to pick up on all the things that you may have missed throughout the film. Also, we run into the leader of the neighborhood Watch Alliance, the NWA. And yes, that is a nod to the hip-hop group NWA. Obviously, I can't say what their real name is, but this is a total nod to them because they are all fans of the NWA and their group. So I thought, again, that was a brilliant way to pay homage to one of their favorite hip-hop groups. I thought that was super dope. You also have moments like this.
Farmers?
Who else?
Farmers' mums.
Yeah, I love that. You know, there's more guns in the country than there are in the city. Everyone's packing around here. Like who? Farmers. Who else? Farmers' mums. Again, this may seem like a throwaway line. I promise you it's going to come back into play later. Now, one of the police officers that he's replacing was Sergeant Popwell. Sergeant Popwell was a great police officer, but he had a big old bushy beard, we come to find out. And they actually asked him,
But you can't wait to jump into Sergeant Popwell's grave.
I'm not jumping into anyone's grave.
again, they say everything here for a reason. Everything that Danny, they leave the pub, they go and they're walking around, and everything Danny asked Nicholas.
You ever fired 2 guns whilst jumping through the air? No. You ever fired a gun whilst in high-speed pursuit? No.
But again, we couldn't have a movie like this without a lot of humor. And I think that one of the funniest parts, he gets a phone call while he's at the station. He's like, the Swans escaped. He's like, oh, the Swans escaped. And he's looking around to try to see who's making the phone call. And he's like, okay, where's the Swan escape from? He's like, the castle. The castle. Okay, and who is this? Peter Ian Staker. P.I. Staker. And he says,
Yeah, Mr. Peter Ian Staker.
P.I. Staker. Right. Piss taker. Come on!
Yes, Mr. Staker.
and when he goes there and he's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Staker, the Swans, again, belly laugh every time. Because again, P.I. Staker, piss taker, come on! Then he goes there and he's actually there. So, obviously they're trying to catch a swan, and they go to the shop to get Coronado trilogy. And I had a European friend tell me I say that really badly, and I'm so sorry, guys. But while they're at the shop, they ask him a certain question.
No luck catching them swans, then?
It's just the one swan, actually.
Now, when they go to the other shop, Mr. Skinner's shop, you can see that he's looking through a pile of DVDs. Now, one of the DVDs says Zombie Party. Now, what Zombie Party is Shaun of the Dead. And if you look at that cover closely, you can see the price tag is right over Simon Pegg's face. Again, little Easter egg for fans. And we get to see that they put their own movie in this movie, changed the title, put a sticker over his face, and that is an exact copy of Shaun of the Dead. And I think that that's a brilliant thing for them to do. They also do another Shaun of the Dead reference when he's going and jumping the fences to try to chase down the kid that stole the cookies from Mr. Skinner's grocery store. Here, obviously, he does it a little bit better than he does in Shaun of the Dead, but these callbacks to me, I love callbacks like that, especially to their own previous work, paying homage to themselves, essentially. I think that when we get stuff like that, especially when you love these movies as much as I do, I love Shaun of the Dead. I love Hot Fuzz, and on any given day of the week, each one could be my favorite. So to see them giving nods to each other is awesome. And he does tell Danny that the most useful tool you will ever use is your notebook.
This is the most important piece of equipment you will ever own. This notebook has saved my skin more times than I care to mention.
And right before that, everything that the guy was saying that he pulled over, he was writing down. He's like, you don't have to write this down. Don't have to write this down. Stop writing. Stop writing. And he's telling him, like, this has saved my skin more times than I care to mention. And, when he sees that, Martin Blower, he freezes up. And he's like, I'm sorry, guys. I really am. So him and Eve Draper are the leads in Romeo and Juliet. And they invite Danny and Nicholas to go. They can't go, obviously, because they just rebuked them. Jug on. And the captain asks them to go. So they go and they watch it, and they are just not enjoying it whatsoever. As they are talking, Skinner comes up at the end of the show and is like, just talking to Eve Draper so like menacingly. We've already gotten so many hints that Skinner is the killer here. Like, there's so many hints dropped that he's the killer. Now, when they close the doors, they go backstage. Eve Draper and Martin Blower, they're not married. Martin Blower is married, obviously having an affair with Eve, because they just sat through 3 hours of so-called acting, and their kiss was the only convincing part of it. He gets a knock on the door. He opens the door. We see him getting axed. We see a hooded figure that slashes him with an axe, completely kills him. We then cut to the road. He's been decapitated. Eve Draper's dead in the car as well. And Nicholas is the only one that suspects foul play. He goes and he talks to the Andes. And when he's talking to the Andes, which are two other characters, they're both called Andrew. He's like, you guys need to look into this. It's your jobs, detect. And they're like, well, what do you think? He's like, skid marks. He's like, who's being childish now? And there was no skid marks at the scene. Don't you think it's weird that he never applied his brakes when he lost control of the car? So now they're kind of like, but then they just blow him off anyway. Which does lead us directly into another Shaun of the Dead reference.
Yeah, Roy.
Again, when you hear Ed say it,
Yeah, boy.
how can you not love it, man? You get to hear Danny say it and Ed say it. I'm all in. I was hoping for another one of those in The World's End, which unfortunately we didn't get. But when they go to the bar for the after party, they're having a real serious conversation. And then Danny's just like, hey, look at this. And he puts a fork in his eye and shoots it out and blood goes all over the place. Turns out it's just a ketchup packet. It's a little trick that he does. And it's just amazing because he's telling this whole story, Nicholas is, about how his uncle had given him a little Tykes police cruiser when he was a kid, and he used to drive that all over town and arrest kids. And but it turns out his uncle was selling drugs, and he probably bought the little car with the drug money, so he never drove it again. And then Ed just does this. Ed, I'm sorry, now I'm getting Shaun of the Dead in here. I apologize. Then Danny does that. So I thought that was, it's a really funny moment to me. That'll come back later. I know you're tired of hearing me say it, but it will. Also, we have Simon Skinner saying this.
He'll be in bits tomorrow.
Talking about George Merchant. He's drunk. He'll be in pieces tomorrow. And how right he is, because we get him going home. He's in his house. All of a sudden, he turns around. The figure hits him in the head with a baton, puts beans on the stove, bacon on the stove, opens the gas, lights a candle, boom, explosion. George Merchant is dead, and we find him in bits in the morning. And again, I'm not going over every single little minor plot detail, because if you haven't seen this movie, it's something you really should. Nicholas is suspicious of all this. Every time something happens, they're all classifying it as an accident. It was an automobile accident, which you can't call an accident. You have to call a collision, because an accident implies that there's someone to blame. So the first one was a traffic collision. The second one with George Merchant was the stove. So it was an accident that he died. Well, Tim Messenger, who's the local paper writer, I was going to say paper boy. He's like the local journalist, and he's known for misspelling everything. Morning, Angle, because he put him in the paper as Angle. They're having like a church charity event. And he tells Nicholas, he says, hey, I got to talk to you. Meet me by the church tower at 3 o'clock. It's very important. So now Nicholas is like, maybe he knows what's going on. Nicholas goes to meet him. And this is where we get Tim Messenger's death, which is probably the best death in the whole movie. I can't show you the whole one because YouTube gave me the finger when I tried to. But I do love this kill. It looks really good. And after this, Nicholas is like, I'm tired. They call it an accident. We knew the church roof was bad. So Nicholas goes, looking through every issue of the paper that he did, and he thinks he's come down to it. He thinks he's got the theory on why all these accidents are happening. They want to put a big shopping center in town, and all the people that have died were in some ways connected to this big shopping center that was going to be going into town. And right at this moment, we find out it's Danny's birthday. And Nicholas feels bad, so he leaves. He goes to Mrs. Tiller's. Her horticultural expertise helped to put Sanford on the map, and she is telling him, like, yeah, I'm getting out of town because, cousin Sissy, who is Skinner, they're going to be putting this big highway in. They're going to be putting shopping centers in, and so she's pretty much selling high at this point. Nicholas then goes to his car. He turns around and sees that she's been stabbed in the throat with her own shears. He chases after the killer, but at every turn, the killer gets farther and farther away. So the killer's a very good runner. When Nicholas was on his run the first day he was there, Skinner came up to him. He's a fun runner, and he told him, like, you need to lock me up. I'm a slasher of prices at my store, the corny old stuff. But at the same time, we know that he can run. So, seeing Mrs. Tiller's death, and then nobody believes him still. There's a funny moment here where he's like, Leslie Tiller was fucking murdered. And they're like, murder, murder, murder. Can you change the fucking record? He's like, just like Tim Messenger? Yes. Just like Eve Draper? Yes. And George Merchant? No, actually. Really? Of fucking course he was. And it's just, the comedy it lands. Like, it's so good. But at this point, Nicholas is just defeated. Like, he's done with it. Like, nobody believes him. You know, they're sitting there in the car and he's just beaten down. And they end up going to the shop to get a Coronado. And this is where we hear this.
No luck catching them killers then?
It's just the one killer, actually.
I told you that would come back into play. But now Nicholas puts it together. There's more than one killer. So he goes back and he goes to his hotel room to get ready to bust this thing wide open, as he says, and he's attacked by a hooded figure. The hooded figure turns out to be Michael, one of Skinner's employees. We've seen him a couple times throughout the movie. Really tall, lurch-like guy. But he gets the better of him. They walkie him, and they're like, is he done? Yarp. So they think that he's dead. We then see that there's the meeting of the NWA, and I call this the dark NWA. The earlier meeting where they all met, that was kind of the light NWA. This is the dark NWA, because you have them in the daytime and in the nighttime, and they're all cloaked. So they've all been in on it together. And it's for Village of the Year, essentially, is why they're doing it. And you find out here that, when Nicholas busts him, they killed him all for the dumbest reasons possible. Like, Nicholas's theory, completely wrong. Martin, he was a bad actor. Eve, she had a terrible laugh. George Merchant, he had a terrible house. It was so ungaudy. And then Tim Messenger, all the errors he made in the newspaper. And Leslie Tiller, they killed her because she was leaving. If I can't have her, nobody can, type of thing. And we also find out not only is the whole town on it, but also Danny and his dad, the sergeant, are also in on it. And it's so heartbreaking when Nicholas looks at it. He's like, Danny, no. He's heartbroken at this point. He takes off running. He falls into Sergeant Popwell's grave. I told you I'd come back into play. But it's not only him. All the kids he arrested earlier are killed and down there. The kid that stole the cookies that they didn't press charges on is down there dead. Everybody that's had some type of criminal activity or anything that could be put into law is now dead. That's what they do. They kill him and they call it an accident. That's why Sanford has no crime rate whatsoever, but a huge accident rate. And it's all to win Village of the Year, which, again, it's the corniest reason, but it works so well. And you have the twist of the whole town essentially is in on it. And then, he gets out. He fell down in the grave, which is actually like a trailer or like a camper. He runs out the front. Danny comes up and stabs him right in the chest. You see the blood squirt. Nicholas falls down. Danny takes him. We then see Danny going and opening the trunk to get Nicholas out, and he holds up the ketchup packets. Ta-da! So Danny's really not in on it. Danny's an innocent bystander in this, and he can't believe that his dad would do something so evil. And Nicholas is telling him, like, come on, we'll bring London Fury down here. And he's like, I can't. It's Sanford. It's my family. So then Nicholas goes and he's at a store getting gas, and he turns around and looks, and he sees Bad Boys 2 and Point Break. And this is what he decides. He's going to go back. And he shows up the first morning, and he's in the car, and you see one of the guys, and he goes and he punches him in the face. And then this is when... See, they told you earlier, everybody's packing. Farmers and their mums. Again, on like my third rewatch, I caught this, and I just laughed so hard. I was like, no way. Like when he calls out for his mom, and she jumps up, and she has the gun. And then, he goes to town, and he has a shootout. Like I said, he's having a shootout with every single person right in the right order of what he saw him when he first. And when he sees the lady from the motel, she yells fascist, he yells hag, and they go into their shootout. And you have the ending carnage. It's so good. Like all the carnage. You have him jumping through the air while firing 2 guns. We knew that would come back into play. And there's all this carnage that's happening in town. Like they're going through a whole shootout. And the people from Village of the Year are there just watching it like, oh, okay then, yeah. And then the other cops, the Andes and all them, none of them were in on it. Like they're all like, and then the sergeant's like, arrest these men. And they're like, maybe it's time you stopped, sir. And he shoots up into the sky and knocks the lamp down. And The chandelier comes down and they run off. And I forgot to say earlier, everything they do is for the greater good. That's what they call it. It's for the greater good of the town. And that's their whole reasoning why, is because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's good for, the greater good.
Shut it!
Thank you, Nicholas. I was tired of hearing it as well. And it's just so funny that, like, you always have this huge reason for why these happened. The shopping mall was coming in, so we had to stop it. There's always this huge reasoning behind everything. And this is just, they're a bad actor. She had a bad laugh. He had a terrible looking house. He made grammatical errors. It's just like the worst reasoning possible. But again, very slasher, extremely slasher. And the whole third act was foreshadowed throughout the movie. Like I said, from lines delivered to the order that he met the people. And they go to the grocery store. There's a huge shootout here, which YouTube also made me cut. But they do call Simon Skinner the Big Boss. And I love that. That's a video game reference. They say that in the commentary. They purposely called him the Big Boss. And Nicholas has a fight with Skinner. And he steps on a car. And they're on like a model of Sanford.
It's Sanford.
And that goes through his mouth. And it's poking out the top of his mouth. And ouchie. It's so good. Well then, they have the shootout. They're driving. And they're having the shootout while they're driving, which was also predicted earlier by Danny. Well, it turns out the London police, they've been trying to call Nicholas the whole time. Now they're here and they're like, Nicholas, we want you to come back. And he delivers.
I kind of like it here. Besides, we have to do a considerable amount of paperwork.
I kind of like it here. I want to stay here. They go back and they're filing out. And besides, I have a considerable amount of paperwork to do. They go back. They're filling out all the paperwork, trying to get it all done. Out comes the leader of the NWA. You're a bloody busybody. He shoots at Nicholas. And this is where Danny jumps in the way and Danny is shot. They then take out the guy from the NWA. We flash forward to a year later. And a year later, we see Nicholas is taking flowers to the grave. And obviously Danny's dead. Psych, he's not. They're taking flowers to his mom's grave. And it's kind of like, it's definitely a happier ending. When you first see Danny get shot, all that went through my mind was Shaun of the Dead. I'm like, oh, so it's just like Ed. He's going to die in this one too. But to see them both survive and, at the end, they get a call on the radio and that we're on it. And they drive off into that. So why is this movie a horror movie to me? Not only does it have the slasher and the whodunit aspect, a lot of what they do throughout this movie is extremely horror to me. When he falls into the grave and you find out that they've been killing everybody in town just because they were drinking at a bar underage, just because they were spray painting, just because they were a human statue, just because they tried to stop them, like Sergeant Popwell. You have the whole town in on this. This is very Wicker Man. If you take the slasher elements out of this, this is very, very akin to the Wicker Man. I could see a lot of Wicker Man influences throughout this, except for the comedy. Honestly, I obviously there's a lot more comedy in Hot Fuzz than there is in the Wicker Man. But the similarities between the two, if you take out the comedy from Hot Fuzz and you take out the musical aspect of the Wicker Man, there's extreme similarities between both of these movies. And I love this movie. I think it's absolutely amazing. But after everything I just talked about, guys, what are your thoughts on Hot Fuzz? Is it a horror movie? Is it not a horror movie? What is your favorite movie of the Coronado trilogy? Is it Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, or The World's End? I would love to know. Is there anything about Hot Fuzz that I didn't talk about that you love about the movie? Please let us know down in the comments. We would be honored to check it out. And I want to know what you guys think. Am I crazy? I want to know if you guys think this is a horror movie. So please let me know. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. It does help build the channel more than you know. And follow us on social media. Our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.